We have now Charles Kneuper, who's a state resource conservationist for the USDA-Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Texas. He has worked for the NRCS for over 20 years and was previously the state rangeland management specialist. So, Charles.
Good morning, everybody. I'm glad I was able to get over here and get to visit about Juniper and about NRCS and how we go about dealing with juniper and other brush problems that we have across the state. I was really glad to hear Becky's talk earlier because, believe it or not, I grew up in Medina, Texas on the Medina River, so getting to see some of that and be familiar with that land area has been, it's always good to hear about it, and Medina's not one that's often talked about, so I was glad to hear that. So to kick off, I work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and one of the things that we do is that we provide technical assistance to folks so that we can address natural resource concerns that are on their property while at the same time meeting their goals and objectives that they may want to accomplish on their land. So we are voluntary conservation. And with that, what NRCS is able to provide is two avenues. One, we have the avenue of technical assistance, and then we also have the avenue of financial assistance. And I have to smile a little bit about the financial assistance aspect here because of a couple of talks this morning where we already talked about the incentive programs and that kind of thing, because we're going to talk a little bit about how NRCS wants to look at and go about administering their financial assistance programs. So we'll get into that and a little bit of detail. There's three opportunities as far as the technical assistance that NRCS can provide. One of the first things that we're able to do is we're contacted by a landowner who has a problem on their landscape and they're needing some help, wanting to know what they should do or how they should go about addressing this problem. So what we do is we're able to go out onto their place, and NRCS is able to do a complete inventory of their property. We do the inventory, we do a lot of different assessments that we have. We have different assessment tools that we're able to utilize in order to identify any number of natural resource concerns. Anything from soil erosion to plant health to do we have enough feed and forage for livestock? Do we have the right type of species of plants out there to provide food and habitat for wildlife species? Whatever it may be. We also take a look at the area in general. Is it going to be an area where we have some endangered species or threatened species that we want to address, or we want to make sure that we go about making a plan for those areas so that we can address the needs of the land, we address the needs of the landowner, but we also address the needs of those wildlife species. One thing to note when we talk about this is that when NRCS comes out, and this, I'm going to say this in a theoretical sense because I cannot speak for every NRCS employee out there, but in theory what our role is that when we show up to your property, we're there to help speak for the resource. We're going to be able to talk to you and have a conversation with you. We're going to hear what your problems are, what your concerns are, and anything like that. But then our role is to also, and I think it was Lindsay that said it earlier about having a conversation with the plants or something like that. Our role is to actually speak for the resource, identify those problems, translate what the land is telling us to the landowners so that we can come up with some alternatives that would best suit their needs and also the needs of the land and all the other natural resources that are there. So with that, we do identify the problems, but we also identify opportunities. What are some things that maybe a landowner hasn't thought about, or maybe they've thought about it but didn't know quite what to do to navigate the waters to be able to make something happen? One of the other things we want to do with that too is we also want to try to manage expectations. I say manage expectations. I know that Becky talked a little bit about the use of prescribed fire earlier. And one of the things that I want to point out with that is one of the problems that we sometimes run into is we talk about some of these practices from a one-time, we're going to apply it once, and then we're done. Well, sometimes that's not how it works. And with fire, that sometimes is we need to run fire one time to start managing the vegetation or the fuel load so that we can get the right fuel load that's needed in order to run another fire or even 2 fires down the road to actually achieve the objective that the landowner has and to address that concern that they may have had on their land. So those are some of the things that we want to do. In doing all of this, identifying those problems, identifying those opportunities, we're able to also come back then and say, okay, we're going to develop alternatives that can address these problems but can also meet the needs of the landowner. So what are those alternatives? It could be any number of things that could be utilized, and these are our conservation practices, but there's any number of conservation practices that we could utilize in order to address that concern and to address landowner needs. And we talk through those things with the landowner, and this is again where it becomes voluntary conservation. This is the landowner's plan, it is their operation, it is what they want to do. So they're going to make a decision and select the practices that best fit their needs, that best fit what their goals may be, best fit what their financial situation is, whatever it is. There's all types of factors that go into how that landowner makes that decision. We want them to have the best information possible so that they can make that decision for how they want to approach these problems on their land and then achieve their objective. On that note, I want to at least make a quick comment to Dr. Messick's message this morning, in that I just recently went out to a place, maybe last week, on an individual who had been doing some work for the Houston Toad. And it was interesting as we were driving around the property and we're on our way back to his house. We had a Parks and Wildlife individual in the vehicle with us, and they were talking about all of the needs of the toad and all of that kind of stuff. The landowner looked at me and he said, you know, I'm not really that concerned about the toad, but what I am interested in is trying to restore my land back to something a little more natural than what it was. He knew that there was a problem. He just didn't know what all needed to happen. And so he was able to utilize that opportunity to start getting a landscape that better suited what he was after. One of the things that had occurred where they did the work was painted buntings were starting to show back up in the area. He and his wife, very happy about seeing the painted buntings coming back. So they achieved something that they wanted, but it was through another avenue of something that he claimed was not necessarily his number one objective. So some of those, while it may not be the objective that the landowner has, they're able to achieve some of the outcomes that they would like to achieve. The third aspect that we do get from our technical assistance is that we're able to leverage experience and knowledge of others. One of the ways that this is done, when I started in the NRCS, one of my mentors was Mr. Steve Nelly, and so I appreciate all of the learning and education that Steve provided to me. And so I'm able to take that information, take some of the experience that he told me about, and I was able to learn from those opportunities, and I can take that to the different landowners that I work with. The other thing that I'm able to do is I work with one landowner here, and I see things that are working with what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish or something like that. I can take that same information to their neighbor. And the one thing that's kind of funny about the neighbor to neighbor and private landowners is they are private. You know, they don't want you to tell people what they're doing. And even some neighbors, they're ones that they say, well, you know, I want to know what they're doing over there, but don't tell them I'm asking. So we're able to take those experiences, we're able to take what landowners are doing and carry that across a landscape. Now, of course, we know that landowners, through their networking and all of that, we always do have the neighbor-to-neighbor communication. They talk about what's happening, what they're doing on their place, and what are some of the outcomes. The great thing about that is that no two landowners have the same objectives. No two landowners want the same outcomes. And so there's not a one size fits all. There's not a recipe that just fits for every situation or anything like that. And so that's the joy of working with the NRCS and being able to get out and develop those relationships with our landowners to be able to identify what it is that we can do to help you. So we'll get into some of the financial assistance that can go along with that. And I want to bring this up because what we've done to this point in a theoretical setting, and again, this is in the perfect world of how we would be doing these things, is we've gone out to the place, we've worked with the individual, we'll go about developing a conservation plan. That conservation plan is a record of the landowner's decisions. Now, in doing so, we're going to use different tools to be able to identify the needs, what can be done, anything like that. One of the tools that we do use is ecological site descriptions. And I know that Brian Christensen will be talking about those a little bit later. But we utilize those because they give us an idea of a generalized landscape area, what it should look like, and it identifies several different plant communities that could exist on that site. What we're able to do with that is we can say, okay, we know what this should be. We know what some of the possibilities are that may meet a landowner's objectives or may meet their needs. And then we also know what it shouldn't be. Now with that, especially when we start talking about juniper and what's happening in the hill country, we know that there are some landscapes that juniper should be there. That juniper is actually serving a purpose. I can't go into detail about what the purpose is. I don't know. There's a lot of plants out there that serve a purpose, but I don't know exactly what that purpose is. But that it's serving a purpose. There's other situations where that plant is out there, and what it's actually telling us is that we've got a problem. That's Mother Nature's way of speaking to us to say we've got a problem, and so that's where we start focusing and developing a plan of action for this landowner. We'll design those practices. And then what happens? Well, in essence, nothing. Especially today because the cost to actually implement any type of land restoration, any type of practice, anything to that effect is a great burden for the landowners. They simply can't afford to do it on their own. They don't get a return from a money standpoint to be able to make it worth their while. I had a college professor that he always made this joke. Every year that we took his class, first words out of his mouth, money drives everything. Money drives everything. And we'd always laugh about it. We thought it was just a joke with him. We thought he was wanting to be a banker or something like that. But he wasn't. Long story short, he's correct. Landowners are not going to be able to implement a lot of the conservation that we talk about because they simply can't afford it. Or if they could afford it, they don't necessarily get the return for the money that they invest to be able to do that. So it leads to a statement that's out there. I've heard it before. I actually heard it when I walked in here today. But conservation without compensation is only conversation. And so if we're only going to talk about it, then we're not actually getting anything done. And so that's where our financial assistance can come into play. We help provide financial assistance. We provide dollars to landowners so that they're able to implement some of these conservation practices to achieve these desired outcomes that they have. Again, this is voluntary conservation. It is up to the landowner to make that application. It is up to the landowner if they want to sign a contract, anything like that. So it's all on them. And we go about designing those practices and how they're going to be achieved based on the goals and objectives of the landowner, what their desires are, but also some of the other factors that we've identified on the property. We would have had that conversation with them, but if we identify that there's potential endangered species out there, we want to make sure we go about doing things in a way that we don't cause harm to that endangered species. So that's what we'll do. And I'm going to talk about a couple of our financial assistance programs. We have some additional ones, and when I heard Becky's talk, I got to thinking about I could have put something in here regarding our easement program, but I don't have that information in here. If you do have any questions about that, you know, afterwards or anything like that, send me an email, give me a phone call, something like that, and we can get you in contact with the right person so that you can talk about that. The two financial assistance programs that I'm going to talk about are our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP, and our Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. So under EQIP, the purpose of EQIP is to promote ag production, forest management, environmental quality, and that all of this production along with environmental quality, that they are compatible with one another. That's what we're trying to accomplish and trying to achieve. The biggest practice that we provide financial assistance for through EQIP in Texas is brush management. We have a lot of different brush species across the state, but when you get into the hill country and all that, you can guess which species is the number one that we approach. So we have brush management. We're able to go in and we're able to clear out brush in patterns. We can do this in any number of ways. We can do it in patterns. We can do it in particular areas that will give the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. We do know by using our tools and all that, some places where we're not going to get the response by taking out the juniper that we would like to see. So there's sometimes we're like, and we have the conversation with the landowner, there's no need to remove that brush in that area because we're not going to get any type of response or not the desired response. For CSP,
I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to probably wrap it up so we can get the next speaker on. All right, sorry.
For CSP, it is basically taking people to the next level. What they're doing here is not necessarily practices, but they're doing enhancements. They're enhancing a practice that they may have already done. There's any number of ways to say that they're enhancing a practice, but it could be the methodology that they use in brush management. It could be just something with regard to the way that they plant. They may be doing some plantings to get some vegetation back on site, but they're doing some additional species that may benefit pollinators or something to that effect. In order to get into CSP, you do have to be meeting a certain threshold with those natural resource concerns that are identified. And then at the end of that contract, you will have taken one to a higher level, or you will address an additional resource concern that's been identified on your property. CSP is a 5-year contract, whereas EQIP could be as little as 1 year, but it can be no longer than 10 years. And so how you can go about finding NRCS, if you'll go to Google and just Google Texas NRCS, it'll take you to the NRCS website, the Texas NRCS website. And you can scroll down that just a little ways and you'll find a spot where it says find your local service center. It already has Texas identified. All you have to do is put in the county in which you live, and that will bring up then the contact information for the folks in that county. And with that, there's my email address if you need to get in contact with me, and I will be wrapping up.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Do we have time for a question or two? One quick question? Sure. Go ahead. Anybody? Quick question? Back in the back.
So the way that we would be approaching that is that we would then work with other partners that we have, such as U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife Department, all of that, we would find the necessary information that outlines the needed habitat requirements, and we would design the practices to be able to address those needs. I know that we do ecosystem-based conservation. I know that we have some references to literature that's out there that may not meet all of those necessary requirements, but those are not black and white in how we can approach what the conservation activities and efforts are that we're going to put forward. Now, I'm going to qualify everything that I just said with this. That is the answer that I am giving you today. However, that answer is not well known across the state with all of our field offices and all of our field office employees. One of the things that they have available to them is they have administrative areas where they can contact wildlife biologists, range specialists, any one of our technical specialists that would be able to provide the necessary information to them. And so there is a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of lack of knowledge across the state with our employees that we're working to improve our training methods to get them the needed information so that we can provide the correct conservation alternatives to the landowners.